All right, all right. Thank you so much for coming to another episode. In this podcast, we're focusing on the stories in aviation, the owners, and then most of them have a pretty unique story, just like today. What got them to the point where they were able to own aircraft themselves? And today, I've got Dan Milliken with me. He is the host of Taking Off Podcast. He has, it truly is an honor because I think he's got probably one of the most popular, if not the most popular podcast and YouTube channel going right now in the United States, and it is awesome. The level, Dan, I've been doing a lot of filming and growing and building content. Your level of content has gotten better and better and better each year. It's very obvious that you take it's serious and you're benefiting the whole community and you're giving it freely through your YouTube channel and your podcast. So I'm very gracious that you're on here and thank you so much.
Oh yeah, you bet. And no, we're not the largest, not even close, but I appreciate it.
It's pretty close. I mean, you're up there. So again, thanks for being here. I'm going to kick it off in this podcast. We're talking about what got you into aviation. So Dan, when did you start flying? Most people, when they get into aviation, there's like something happens and then they get this sparkle in their eye and they can't make it go away. And then they're hooked, for the rest of their life. What got you there?
All right. Well, as a kid, I just loved aviation. I loved all things airplanes. Favorite show back then was Baba Black Sheep, so I was all part of that generation. Then when I graduated high school and went into college, I was 100% self-funded for my way through college. So it was up to me. So I worked 2 jobs and went to school full time. And I remember being at church and one of the associate pastors was a flight instructor. And oh man, I'd always want to learn to fly. So I thought, yeah, maybe I could do this. So I talked to him and he brought reality home pretty quick and how much it was going to cost and everything else. And there was no way. There's just no way I could do it. I didn't have anywhere near the money to do that. And so I just kind of quickly shelved that and then got on with my life. Graduated with a degree in film and TV and, been making movies and TV shows and commercials, corporate videos, music videos, whatever for all of my adult life. And then, so about 12 years ago, drones kind of started happening. And that revolutionized my industry of video production, video and film. In the past, the only way you could get an elevated shot was either rent an expensive helicopter or airplane, or you get a jib, and the jib's only going to give you up to maybe 30, 40 feet at the most. And so, and the airplane's going to not, or a helicopter's not going to give you very low generally. I mean, you're not going to be able to get 30, 40 feet consistently. I mean, so, I did some movies. We had helicopters. I've had jibs, I've done all that stuff. When drones came, it gave you a sweet spot of, that 30 to 60 foot view and even more or less. I mean, I was using drones inside manufacturing plants and warehouses and doing follows on cars and everything else. And drones, redid the way my industry does business. And so then I started reading right after, and back then this was before the small little DJI drones. What I had was an octocopter. It was, with 16-inch wooden props and 8 of those. I mean, this thing could kill, but it could also handle 18-pound payload, so it could take a camera. But the technology wasn't great, and the thing would just fly away or turn upside down and run into the ground, which it did a few times, and eventually that's how it went away. But I started reading and hearing stories of the FAA chasing drone operators back then, 12 years ago, because they were making money with their drone usage and they did not have a commercial pilot's license. Well, that takes years and tens of thousands of dollars to be able to accomplish a commercial pilot's license. Well, some people fought back and the FAA gave way. They said, okay, yeah, it's unreasonable. So if you want to get any level of pilot's license, we'll grant you an exception from the commercial pilot's rule if you apply for it. And this is before the drone license, the 107. and they knew they were several years away from the 107. And so that was my excuse. And now I had a reason to go and get my pilot's license. So in 2015, January, I signed up. I didn't need a discovery flight. Let's go lesson 1. I knew I was going to do it. And so that's how I got into aviation.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. And it's really cool. A couple of things I want to touch on. Most of my customers started flying and taking lessons later on in life after they were already successful. They were able to find the time. It seems, luckily for me, I was really young. And, I graduated high school, I already had the bug in me. I joined the military, and I had the cash and the time. So I was able to just knock it out. But, for most people, I just want to say, if you're thinking about purchasing an aircraft, most of the owners get their private pilot's license, in their 40s and 50s. They purchase a plane in that age range.
And one thing I want to mention, too, when I was in college, I honestly, my perspective, this is going to be the mid-'80s. My perspective was that the airlines, 95% were military pilots. So unless I went to the military, there was no way I could be an airline pilot. So it never crossed my mind that I could actually make a career of it. And I remember meeting a guy at church later, a long time later, like 2005, finding out that he's a pilot for American. Well, what service were you in? And he was like, no, I never was in service. Then come to find out, like 30% of the pilots are actually from the military. That I did not realize that. Had I known that back then, maybe I would have thought about going after it as a career. But yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's very rare that you find pilots from the military going straight to the airlines. Most people, from what I've seen, the stories that I've gathered in the industry, they either started, they were successful business owners, and then now they have enough to start buying back their time. And they use this tool, which is an airplane, which is a time machine for the most part, and they get their private, and then they work on their instrument during that time. But the rest of the world, most of it is they'll go and get the training and pay their dues in whatever way, right? They'll either fly seaplanes or pick up, be a CFI for years, and then work their way, pay their dues. The most extreme case I had a friend actually here in Tennessee. He was a doctor for years, and he retired a doctor, and he was 60. And meanwhile, he had been working on his licenses, and he had the time. And he just touched base with the airlines during the height of this most recent hiring craze after COVID. He's like, I've got 5 years. What do you think? And they were like, yeah, we'll take you.
Yeah.
So it's some
he was probably
cases.
Right at the cutoff. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, not any kind of cutoff written down, but cutoff to where it just doesn't make sense is, yeah.
Yep. So it's really cool. And then, when I was in college, that was kind of when it was still like Wild Wild West, and people were building these drones. And I had friends that had built drones, and they were working for realtors as kind of like bird dogs or filming
that was some
houses.
early stuff, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And then all of a sudden, the FAA just kind of put a shebang on all of those people and stopped it. I forget how long it was, but there was a significant gap, it seemed like, where they were going to take action against anyone receiving funds using a drone.
Well, I was worried about it. So, when I heard, I was doing it and scared, of getting caught. And then I heard the FAA was giving this 333 exemption for anybody with any pilot's license. So I was like, well, that's my excuse. So I went after it. And then I applied for the 333. And what's interesting is, as I looked at it, mountain of paperwork to be able to do it, there were places offering help at like $5,000 a pop, and that was a cheaper one. And I remember going, I can't really afford that. That doesn't make sense. So I just went through the FAA's thing, just trying to figure out the red tape. I applied all on my own. I think I watched a couple of YouTube videos. I may have spent like $10 or $20 on a private YouTube video that explained the process, but I did. Got it done, and I got my 333 exemption. So I was one of the few. I think there were probably less than 2,000 people that went through that and got the 333. And so I was one of the few that were actually legal, but still, the majority of people didn't bother to do that.
Yeah, you're taking me back. I forgot about that. I dabbled a little bit in it, but I had more friends in the industry that were messing with them. I completely forgot about the 333, and then all of a sudden, I want to say was it around 2016, 2015, maybe? Somewhere in that range is when they kind of decided to do the remote pilot license. And then...
Well, the remote pilot license didn't hit until 2018 or 19, I think.
That's right.
Because, and the audience can correct me, because I went for it in 2015. That's when I got my pilot's license, which means it was already been out there, or that the 333 had already been out there. I got my 333, and it was only valid for a couple of years before the 107 kicked in. So I think that the 333 was a stopgap as they got ready for their 107.
Yeah, and then once they realized the 107, that was still kind of a wild, wild west. I had my private, I already had my ratings at the time, and they decided, like, okay, well, if you've already got your ratings, you're good. Pay the DPE a certain amount of money, and we'll just print out a certificate.
Well, not even a DPE; it was a CFI.
That's right.
All I needed was a CFI to get my 107.
Yeah, they just printed it out. Now I think they said, okay, you're gonna learn some drone rules. There's a course and stuff you have to take. I haven't seen that. Updated
the
stuff.
course. I did it. When I got my 107, I was hoping the 333 would just, they would give me the 107, but that's not how it worked. You had to apply for the 107, and I think I spent 30 minutes at the FAA website, talked to a CFI, he signed off, boom, I was done, because I had a pilot's license. Now, for people without a pilot's license, no, it's a much bigger thing.
Yeah, and I still talk to some people in the industry that use the drones, and I do think it's important. As of right now, I mean, I still fly for the Air Force, and it's starting to become a really big deal on most commercial flying and the military flying, of where drones at this point are becoming a hazard in the traffic area. So it's a hot topic nowadays, but they're still really cool, and it encourage people. That's a whole nother way to get into aviation. That's just much, much cheaper.
Well, I'll say the drones are getting bigger and bigger, and I filmed a demonstration a couple of months ago of a company that is turning Robinson R-44 helicopters into remote pilot airships, so they can do them into more hazardous, ag, crop dusting, whatever. You can have a pilot in the trailer and be flying the helicopter around. A helicopter crashes, nobody dies, at least not in a helicopter. So I think that the day and age, I mean, even the military, I think they're looking at fighters now. AI is just much quicker, I believe, unfortunately, because I think it's, it's what I grew up wanting to be as a fighter pilot. I think that eventually there's not going to be anybody in these fighters and things like that.
Yeah, we'll see. They still need gas, though, so I think I'll be okay.
Yeah, they'll still need to refuel, so
We'll see.
So they'll come up to your KC-135.
It was funny, there was an article that was posted that they're going to replace the co-pilot in the 135s with AI. I don't know if it was a troll thing, but it was funny. Everyone at the base was like, well, we're good. But super cool. So you started flying at a little bit later in life. It seems from the outside looking in, when people start asking me, I could get my license, it seems extremely daunting, and it's quite a bit of a financial and time management investment. How are you able to do this when I assume you were running a business or working a full-time job and had a lot going on? How are you able to manage that?
Well, for those who don't know, there's two main ways to go about getting your pilot's license. You either go through what the FAA calls a Part 141 school, and it's a school, and you're going to go every day kind of thing. Or you can go to a Part 61 school, and that one's more of a at your own speed. And most people in my situation will probably go the second route because you've got a day job. And so, being a business owner for my film and video production company, I could say, okay, I'm going to take the afternoon here and the afternoon there, and I would schedule 2 to 3 flights lessons a week, and at that pay, and then someone would be scrubbed for weather or whatever. And at that pace, it took about 6 months. And, this is 10 years ago. Pilot license was probably at a 61. It was about $7,000 to $10,000 total. Now it's probably 10 to 15, maybe even a little bit more. On a 61, it's going to be pushing 20 on a 141 or more. So it varies. But if you're doing a 141, you might be able to half that time, maybe instead of 6 months, 3 months. Maybe it just depends on the school. I mean, they'll have a schedule and a syllabus and everything else.
Yeah, it's difficult though. At that point, you're having to drop everything and go do school full time. So yeah.
There's somebody like your friend that retired from being a doctor at 60. If he was going to do that, that's what you do. I have another friend here who was a high school principal, and he retired, quit, whatever. And he decided he had saved up money that he was going to go all the way really, really fast. And he got his private and his instrument and his CFI like within 2 months. I mean, it was like 3 flights a day kind of schedule that, any mere mortal could not be able to do, but he could do it. I mean, he got his certificates and his ratings really, really quick.
Yeah. And I bring this up because I think from the outside looking in, it's like, wow, this is really daunting, but it's definitely doable. You've got options.
It's eating an elephant.
Yeah. And
one bite at a time.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So you got your license, and then all of a sudden, at some point you decided to purchase an aircraft, right? Talk to me about your aircraft ownership experience, and then specifically, that here's one thing: if you come into the industry, and you talk about buying a plane, the percentage of people in the United States is like 1% of the population are pilots. The percentage that own airplanes is even smaller. So it's not like you can just ask your brother or, friend down the road. It's very rare. You kind of have to seek it out. So it's not common knowledge on the procedures on how to buy a plane, a pre-buy, all this other stuff. So there's a huge learning curve. Now there's great products out there to help you walk through this, and you can find professionals to help you. But how did you manage that in the beginning?
Well, I did chapter 1 of how I got to my private, and I'll do chapter 2 of private on. So I knew I'd fall in love with aviation. I knew it. I mean, and so as I was finishing my private, I thought about, well, I could rent the school's 172. My biggest client was about 300 miles away, 200 miles away. So it was a 4.5 hour drive all the time with gear and crew. So I was like, well, what if I put the gear and crew on an airplane, and that would be a lot better. So I wanted to do that, but to be able to do that with my clients, I needed to be able to fly in weather, because we can't schedule a film shoot and I'm calling the night before saying, oh, we can't come because there's clouds. I mean, I couldn't do that. So I immediately after getting my private went into IFR and got my instrument as quick as I could. And it was at the end of instrument that I was like, okay, renting the school's plane. First of all, I've got 3 crew people, sometimes even 4, and gear. Well, 172 is not going to even come close to doing that mission. I remember talking to my instrument instructor about different planes. I knew about the 206, the Cessna 206. It's a 6-seater, fixed gear with struts. And I looked at it going, yeah, it can do it. And but then somebody told me about the 210, the Cessna 210. And Cessna's still making the 206. They're not making the 210. So, it was going to be used and everything else. But when I looked at the numbers of the 210, it's faster than the 206. It can carry a little bit more. It's going to be cheaper because it is used. And I fell in love with this Centurion. And I immediately, at the school that I was working at or training at, I started renting the complex plane so I could have some complex hours, because insurance jumps up significantly when you have retractable gear. And that's what a 210 is. And I continued to do a few shoots that were small crew with the 172. I remember during instrument training, I rented the 172 to go to Kentucky from Fort Worth, Texas. And that was that was extremely long for somebody who had, longest cross country was, 200 miles or something. And that was an adventure, and I loved it. And so anyway, I thought about getting a 210, but also looked at numbers. There's no way I could afford it. But I had a friend who had helped me in a Boy Scout-like program that we were doing. I was kind of scoutmaster. He was kind of assistant scoutmaster, and we'd done the aviation merit together with our sons in the group. And he was an American pilot, and I knew that. So I reached out to him saying, "Hey, I got my pilot's license." And he comes back with, "Hey, do you want to get into a plane together?" I was like, "Yeah, that will help." And so I found a partner to go into the Centurion. And I knew I was going to use it more. So we structured it to where I was 2/3, he was a third. I wanted to fly it for pretty much just business only. He wanted to fly it for personal only. So it was a good mix. And we found the 210, we bought the 210, and we were off to the races. And so that's how I got into airplane ownership. And I have used that 210. I have flown 4 people and gear all the way to Connecticut several times, to Montana, to Salt Lake City. We've gone all over the place with gear, and for Florida, all sorts of places.
Yeah, the two, really both of those planes are awesome. It's one of those planes that you can actually put gas in it and people and things. And still be able to take off and not be right on the borderline of your weight and balance.
They say if it fits, it ships, and it does for the most part. And I call it the pickup truck of the sky because it really is. And it's faster than the 206 because of the retract gear. It gives you more knots of speed. And the only time I've really come close to maxing out the weight is when I put actually 6 bodies on board. That's the only time. You'd have to have bags of salt or containers of water to max out. You run out of room before you run out of available weight.
Yeah. It and the other thing is it's a relatively easy aircraft to maintain. And it's
some would disagree, but yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, compared to what? Like a KC-135, yeah. But compared to a Piper, some people would say the Centurion is a lot more because of the retractable gear more than anything else. People freak out about that. Like, oh, I've heard, you're going to do this. Plus mine's a turbo. Oh, with a turbo, you're going to have more maintenance issues and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it is a little bit more expensive at annual, and there have been a few minor issues, but as a big cross-country flyer, I enjoy getting the tailwinds I might get at flight level 210 in my little unpressurized 210 and, get up to 250 knots.
Yeah, that's true. And I suppose that brings a lot of other topics into play. What type of plane, and you touched on a lot of your thought process on what you needed. But that's
all about a mission. You need to set your mission,
right,
and then find out what airplanes fit that mission. And that's what I did. I sat down on paper, ran the numbers. Like when I looked at it, I had to have something that had 1,350 to 1,400 useful load. That means how much weight we can fit on there. And that you have to include fuel in that. So I needed 1,300 to 1,400 pounds. And when you looked at it, actually all the other options went away. The only option was the 210 for a single engine piston.
Yeah. And for the most part, and from my perspective, I get this question a ton. People come to me and ask, what plane should I buy? Turbocharged, not. A lot of my customer base is the Cirrus customer base, and so that's the clear delineation, turbo or not. And at least with this, you don't have to worry about the retractable gear, but it does come into play. And so normally, it definitely does add some to the annual. I would say the things that you may experience with a turbocharged aircraft, just me as the AMPIA, and I seeing these come through my shop. I would say oftentimes if you don't have, especially this type of airplane, if you're not diligent, whether or not like managing the engine, and then especially with leaning, or whether or not, we're not going to go there, rich peak or lean peak, but if you're not diligent with it and you don't have a process at all, you're probably going to have a top overhaul halfway through the life of the engine. It is more common. I think it's just the additional heat that's being generated, and then not to mention the leftover, carbon deposits and lead deposits from a really weak, inefficient electronic or ignition system. So turbos may go out. I do think I think it's rare to see the turbochargers go out. Have you replaced a turbocharger on your plane yet?
I did, and I can't remember, because back then it was early on, and I want to say, so when I bought the airplane, it came with an AD that was coming close to being due. So in the negotiation with the owner, we were able to back off the purchase price, knowing that the AD, the airworthiness directive, was to replace all the cylinders. So a top overhaul was going to be due pretty quick after buying it. And whether your cylinders are good or bad, which it was a horrible AD. But anyway, so I knew it had to go back in. And I know that when we did the top overhaul, we did end up replacing the turbo, but I don't remember why. Now, since then, I've had a couple of issues here and there, the spring on the wastegate fall, or I've had a few other minor issues. And I've gotten to the point now as a pilot, I understand. Like, I was flying down to San Antonio from Fort Worth, night IMC on an IFR flight plan, and I had filed like at, I don't know, 12 or 1400, 12 or 14,000. And as I got over 9,000, 10,000, all of a sudden my manifold pressure is climbing, an inch every 1,000 feet or a couple inches. So I knew, or not climbing, falling, excuse me, my manifold pressure was falling the higher I went, which that says your turbo's not working. So I knew my turbo wasn't working, and so I'm able to figure that stuff out. And it ended up being a fairly minor fix, and it's something had been not installed correctly when I'd had an engine overhaul. So, but we got that fixed, and everything was fine. But so occasionally you'll see things like that.
Yeah, I would say maybe, I don't know, 1 out of every 5 customers maybe have a turbo failure in general in the like airplane ownership experience, which sounds like a lot, but there's not that many planes.
25%, yeah, it is.
There's not that many planes.
But I do enjoy going high, not being high, going high.
Yeah. So what about landing gear wise? Have you had anything? Have you had to replace your landing gear pack?
No, not at all. The only thing that we did recently at last year's annual, and I have a video about this on my that includes it on my channel. Last year we we had a leaking actuator, a hydraulic actuator. So we just cleaned it out, replaced seals, poof, put it back on. And that is the extent. I mean, some normal wear and tear kind of stuff. But that is the extent of the landing gear. I've never had any issues with it whatsoever.
Yeah, I would say, again, for the maintenance shop side, the Cessna landing gear system is, from my perspective, it is. I mean, it kind of leapfrogs back, and you got to jack it up really high. Any of those high wing
on the 210,
172s, you really, really the 172 and up, and they, if you don't have the correct jacks too, you're putting yourself at a major risk. I have seen people get creative.
Oh no!
Trying to jack those
cinder
up.
blocks, something crazy,
or putting it on barrels or something. It's crazy. So putting a jack on top of a barrel and then trying to jack it up. So, food for thought. Make sure the shop that you're working with has the correct. You might want to just be like, oh yeah, that looks like the right stuff. But yeah, I would say for the most part, it is a decent. That system is fine. It's from the maintenance shop, the Piper side of let's say the Saratoga and Cherokee 6 retractable gears. Those definitely I change out a gearbox a lot more often. I get the most trouble out of those. Bonanza, those have a electric gearbox, and those are a fairly robust system. Not a lot of trouble, except they don't get their proper love over the years, and it's got a mechanical gear inside that looks essentially like my hand, and it runs like this 180 degrees both ways, and it's supposed to have an electrical stop that stops it before it hits a mechanical stop. And most people throughout the years, they just bring it in, run the gear up, run it down, and they think that that's the check, but it's a lot more than that. And once it starts hitting the mechanical stops, it actually starts work hardening this bronze gear, and then
Yeah.
eventually it'll develop cracks and then just turn into powder. It'll shatter, and you won't be able to emergency extend the gear at all. So just gee whiz on the pretty much that's the extent of the GA planes landing gear systems. Right. So how did you use a broker when you started looking for an airplane?
We did not. Now the seller did. So we bought the plane from a broker, but we did not use a broker. Between me and my partner, who I later bought out, so I own the plane now 100%. But we just went to Controller and Trade a Plane and all those kind of places, and that's how we found Lola, my 210, in California. So that was quite an adventure bringing her back. So we did not use a broker.
Did you use an escrow company that helped you through the process?
Yeah, we found a bank that did airplane loans, and they were able to assist in it.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm saying these things because if you're listening and you're thinking about purchasing a plane, these are topics that you should be thinking about. And I brought up brokers. Kind of an interesting thing is it's not like real estate, where there's like an approved board and licenses for them. Most of them, there are no licenses on being a broker in aviation, and so it's important to try to work with somebody. If you do, work with someone that is reputable and has been around doing it for a long time.
Yes.
And then an escrow company is very helpful in the process. Most states, when they collect the sales tax for the plane, it's not like just going down to the courthouse. Here in Tennessee, it's a totally different process that's not published. And, I assume it's published somewhere, but it's not common knowledge. And it can definitely get you in trouble where an escrow company just knows it and they just take care of it. It's bang. The other one is a pre-buy. Did you guys did y'all do a pre-buy inspection on the aircraft?
We did. Now, this is the first plane that I'm buying. And by the way, some people have said a retractable, high-performance, so complex airplane is a horrible first plane as an owner. I think it depends on the person, by the way. I think for some it might be. Some it's just fine. But anyway, having said that, pre-buy, I think they're incredibly, incredibly important. If you don't have a pre-buy done on your airplane, I think you're being very foolish. And who does the pre-buy is also very critical. And I know a lot of buyers who will let the person who, maybe the A&P that's been doing the annuals on that particular plane do the pre-buy. That's a big mistake. You need another set of eyes to look at it. And so, I think you've got to do a pre-buy, but I think that pre-buy A&P IA should be somebody on your payroll and not somebody part of the buyer. So, because you do want a very objective view. But here's the problem with that. When you are a buyer, you want to buy an airplane. You want this to be the one. And because of that, you are willing to overlook a lot of things. So I would say if you're a buyer, know yourself. Know that you're going to just want to get it done because you love it. And so you're willing to just take shortcuts and stuff. Don't do that. You'll hate yourself later for it. So, be patient. Make sure you tell yourself every time you don't have to buy this particular plane. You can move on to the next and be willing to walk away. I think that's critical.
Yeah, there's so much wisdom there, and I get lots of calls on doing pre-buys, and my recommendation always is take it somewhere else, somewhere that the mechanic doing it will be completely unbiased.
Right.
So you want an honest, good look at the aircraft. Not saying that people are out there would do. I'm not just trying to toss people under the bus saying, oh, everyone out there is doing something unscrupulous, but for planes around me, I'm looking at them every single year for years in a row, and I know it inside and out. I've built up a really good most of the customers that I have, we're going on years and years of relationships, and we're going to continue to have those years of relationships as long as they're in aviation. And so, it's not right to.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's a bad situation. Not saying that I would do anything to cover up. If you're paying me the money, I'm working for you. But it's put me in a really weird spot because I've got the pressure of my probably going to be. I mean, I'm like friends with most of my customers. Those are
Right.
friends that I talk to on a weekly basis, and so it's just I'm trying to paint this picture so you can understand why you don't want to go to the mechanic that's been working on the plane for 5 or 10 years in a row. It's
Right.
just not a fair look at the plane. You want to take it somewhere else, and truthfully, you may not have a relationship with them. You don't know their level of quality, so you want to take it somewhere, either your own mechanic or somewhere else, literally anywhere else.
Well, and here's what I'd say, and it might be a bit controversial, and you actually may disagree with me on this, and this is fine. So to me, I really believe that you should go to an A&P that specializes in that particular model. And like my A&P is the 210 expert in the country. I mean, him and one other guy that I know of, those two guys are the experts on the Cessna 210. If I were buying a Piper Saratoga, I would not have my A&P that I use do the pre-buy on it, because he knows everything to look for on a 210, because that's what his focus has been for all these years. He knows the tricks, he knows the ADs, he knows the SBs, he knows all those things on the 210. I asked him recently about the 172, and he didn't really want to go there because he does not consider himself an expert on the 172. And here we have a pretty close model, well, not close, but same manufacturer. And so if I were buying a Piper, I'd have a Piper Cherokee, I'd have a Cherokee expert. If I were buying a Cirrus, I'd have a Cirrus expert. So I would go a step further, and on the pre-buy, I'd have an A&P who's an expert in that particular model.
Yeah, I agree. That's always good. And there's normally one shop that kind of focuses on one thing. We just happen to be Cirrus. We work on Bonanzas, Cessnas, Pipers, all kinds of stuff, but we see the most Cirruses. I would say if we had a specialty, that would be what it is. But I think this is a really good topic, and taking it to a shop where you're going to get an unbiased look, and I'll tell you, it is definitely worth it. I've had people come to me and have a pre-buy, and it's been at some other shop for 10 straight years or whatever the case was, and they had already agreed on a certain price, and I realized the engine was off by 600 hours. They advertised hours on the engine, and that's a huge discrepancy that was made years back, and then the mechanics just kind of took the number and kept going with it, and so he was able to go back and negotiate tens of thousands of dollars off the plane just by me going through the logbooks.
The pre-buy will more than pay for itself, I promise you that.
Yeah, and one other 2 cents, if I see a lot, there's always what kind of scope should we do. The pre-buy is specific. It's not an FAA inspection. An annual inspection is an FAA inspection. It's got a specific set of guidelines, and there's a checklist from the manufacturer. And so if you come to me and ask, let's do a pre-buy, I'm going to ask you what kind of scope would you like? And so that's going to be, do you want me to just kick the tires and walk around it? Do you want me to go through the logbooks? You're paying me.
Are we taking a microscope to it? Yeah.
I'm going to do anything that you ask me to do, and then if it's anything less than an annual, I'm going to do that and then stop, because that's what you're paying me to do. And so, I personally do recommend a full annual on it. That's the only way you're going to know exactly where the plane is, depending on the situation. For the most part, if you're buying something that's the same price of a house, and you're putting your family into it, I do truly recommend a full annual on those. But that's just
it's not a bad idea.
Cents.
Oh, I will say this though on that. I know an airplane owner who also uses my mechanic, and he had asked the mechanic for a pre-buy, or an annual. It's like, hey, do you have you have time next week to do a pre-buy or an annual on a 210? It's like he thought a pre-buy and an annual are the same thing, and it's not for a 210. A 210 is a week-long annual minimum, and the a pre-buy is a day. So yeah.
Well, it depends on what kind of pre-buy you want.
Or 2 days. Yeah.
Yeah, you could say.
I guess if you're doing your kind of level of an annual, kind of up to that, then maybe it does take a week.
Yeah. So good food for thought, and then a lot of people, their first time out in the airplane, they have no clue what's going on in the annual inspection. You do quite a bit of wrenching on your plane, right? Did
Now
it open your eyes?
Oh, absolutely. And I didn't really start wrenching on it until about 18 months ago, when I realized, I need to know more about my airplane. So I ended up assisting on my annual a year and a half ago, and I'm a much better pilot because of that. I now, and I'll give you a case in point. It saved me a ton of money, or it can save me a ton of money. So I had a situation where I went to Harlingen, Texas, way down south on a business trip. And I landed, parked at the FBO, and the next day the FBO calls me and sends a picture letting me know that my front oleo strut has collapsed. And so they could see all the fluid on the ground. So now I know that I rolled the lower O-ring. So that's a very common thing in the oleo struts, that you roll the lower O-ring. All your hydraulic fluid then leaks out. And so then I had them replace it or fix it. And when they fixed it, they, some shops might only replace that lower O-ring, but you might as well do both, the lower and the upper. You've got to, do a whole bunch of stuff like that, which I think they did. They certainly charged me for it. But what they did is they charged me $300 or $400 for nitrogen. And so you're like, what? And now I had to get going. So I had to call them later to contest that. But I called 5 different shops. Might have even talked to you. I can't remember. And 4 out of the 5 don't even charge for nitrogen. And the other was some nominal $200 fee. When I called them, we have a really good nitrogen machine. Well, I'm not paying for that. I don't want that. That's especially since, the PS on this story is that 2 weeks later, I show up to my hangar and it's flat again. The oleo strut has collapsed. So whatever they did wasn't good enough, and it leaked, and I had to redo that. So there you go. I learned a lot by wrenching, what an oleo strut is, what an O-ring does, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's hard to know what unless I don't know anything about the situation. But I will say what comes to mind, and I have no clue. But it is surprising.
I hope you don't charge $400 for nitrogen.
No, I can't. I can't imagine a world where no, it's just part of the job, right? Like now, taking apart the oleo strut and putting it back together, and then putting the nitrogen in it. That's all part of the same job, right? Like that's gonna
right.
And
it was all on one invoice.
I have no way to measure. I don't want to go here to toss people under the bus. I'm not criticizing people, but there's no way to measure the there's no way to measure the nitrogen.
Their prices were somewhat reasonable, other than he insisted on having 2 guys there, so I kind of paid double labor. Now that like 2 weeks later, when it failed again, I went and worked with my A&P. You only need a second guy here at the beginning and maybe at the end. It is not a 2-person full-time job to do. So they doubled up the hours, in my opinion. But other than that, it was, and the nitrogen, it was reasonable.
So that the one thing that does come to mind, I don't know about that situation. It does. I will say
it
there's
does
no
smell
way to measure.
a little bit.
I don't know how to measure the nitrogen and then charge you for it. Normally, most shops will have a shop supplies fee that's normally like a bottom line, and it'll be some culmination of the parts and labor, and that's enough to cover like all the I can't charge you for every single screw that goes on. I can't charge you for, and that covers on a blanket way to just kind of take care of the consumables that are so nominal that you can't cover it, the shop supplies. But I will say when you're AOG, I do get this situation a lot though. Somebody stops and they break down, and all of a sudden they need me to drop literally everything, and I got to go fix them right now. And the answer is, okay, I can do that. There is a significant fee for me to do that.
Right.
Or we can schedule it, and I won't have to charge you that at all. If you can just wait like 1 day or 2 days, I will put this in my schedule.
In this situation, I needed to fly out the next morning, and so they call me at 3, and I tell them to go ahead and start repairs because they asked me, "Do you want us to start?" And I was like, "Yes." And then I don't hear from them. I go down there at 4:30. Well, the shop closed at 4, and the supervisor was still there, and he said, "Oh, well, if you want, I can call the guys back out, but it's not time and a half. It was like double time, and or you can wait until tomorrow." And I was like, well, I restructured my business and waited till tomorrow because double time with 2 guys was fairly expensive for this job. But I got it. I mean, I wasn't upset that they were wanting to charge extra for working, they worked their shift. Now they got to come back and work another shift. They should be compensated.
Yeah, and the reason, and I'm just going to just generally outside of your situation, the reason why it may be surprising. It normally is surprising when I talk to somebody about this and try to explain it. They're normally the reaction is, "Oh, you're just trying to get me more."
Right.
But so, for example, I've got a limited number of man hours and a limited number of space in my hangar, and then everybody wants their airplane back yesterday. And so if I have
Right.
to pull 1 or 2 guys off of something, it's putting one of my other paying customers that is normally in my hangar for an annual, which is a significant amount of revenue that's going to help me pay my payroll, right? So it's very important to me to get these planes out on time. And so when I have to pull one guy off or guy or girl to go out and just service up air on a tire or something, something like that to get him out AOG, it is significant for a shop for me, and so I have to make up for that in some way, and that is the general gist of it. Because normally, when I talk about that fee, they're like, "Oh, okay, I'm good till Tuesday." Got it.
Right.
Okay. I just wanted to be upfront. Like, if you can wait, it's going to be better for you and me. I'll take care. This will be a lot cheaper, and I don't have to I can schedule this and stay ahead of the work that's in my hangar.
All right. So in my head, I'm chewing on it, trying to figure out what AOG stands for. I get the context that it's right away. What does AOG stand for?
AOG is aircraft on ground. I don't know who came up with that, but that is normally you're broke down on the road somewhere.
Okay, gotcha. AOG. All right, I don't remember that.
So when you're broke down on the road, you're AOG, and that's normally the time where, hey, I got, it's a holiday, and I've got the kids, and we got to make it back before tomorrow at 1 a.m., and I don't care what the cost is. When you say AOG, that's what that's what you're meaning.
Okay.
So context, and food for thought to aircraft owners out there. I'm sure you've at least run into it once or twice already.
Yeah, I've been AOG then in that situation.
Me as well.
Yeah,
all right.
I don't think you can get away from that being an airplane owner. You will be AOG at different times.
And the reason is, sorry.
Well, I was gonna, they're 50, 60, 70-year-old. Mine's 45, I think now, but they're old planes. The thing is, as a pilot, you have to know it is great to have the freedom to fly, but you cannot ever put yourself in a situation where you have to do this flight, because that's when people die.
Yes. Yeah, that's such wisdom there, honestly. If you, and I try to talk to owners about this too. If you've really, really got to make this flight, you should always be planning on some sort of backup plan on the backside. Otherwise, you could.
I'll give you something I learned from this whole situation with the Oleo strut. It was a shoot with a client, and we had to be somewhere, and we had to do this and that, and I was able to scramble and make it work without spending a ton of money to get somebody overnight. But what I came out of that with now on every single flight that I do as a mission, as a business trip or whatever, going to AirVenture was the same way, is I write down, I have a worksheet of what I'm going to do if I show up to the hangar and the plane's not ready. What are my plans? I'm going to do, I'm now going to pivot to plan B, C, and D. What happens if I break down in flight on the way to this destination? Okay, I'm going to rent a car at the blah, 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 blah. What happens if I break down at location? I run through a worksheet that has all these things so that now I don't have to scramble as hard. I just know, boom, let's start plan B, or let's go to plan C. And I think it's really important that took the get there itis that I might feel for this business flight, and it takes it and lessens it to a greater degree.
Yeah, and where you describing that takes me to personal minimums. Most people have a personal minimum sheet, and get-homeitis is a big thing. And most people that I fly with in the Air Force, most crew members typically have like a rule of 3 also. I'm pivoting just a little bit, but after like the third weird thing that happens, like let's say
strike 3.
You had crazy weather, and then plus the traffic something, the dog got kicked in the morning or whatever, or
you have the sniffles and you're coming down with something. Yeah.
So it starts to stack up, and then all of a sudden, after about the third thing, I am, that's my personal minimum. That's it.
On my personal minimums, I have a 3-strike rule as well.
Yeah. So, and it goes into the mindset too. It seems like you take a lot of caution. How have you had to change your mindset as you entered something that is completely different? Like owning an airplane or flying an airplane. What is your mindset in owning the airplane and flying?
Well, you say I'm very cautious and careful. I'm actually not. It's for anybody who's watched my channel, a lot of my videos I end with superior judgment trumps superior skills. And that's because early on in my airplane ownership, I pushed an IFR and IMC landing to minimums and with crew on board and at night, and I had to do 2 go-arounds. So wasn't able to do that approach until the 3rd time, and I should not have been doing that approach. It was foolish. And I landed shaking a little bit. And I remember being at the FBO with the fog and the plane sitting there. I took a picture of it to remind me. And that's when I started thinking, well, you know what? I think of myself as Han Solo. I'm this fly by the seat of my pants, great pilot who can overcome anything. And so that was kind of my mindset. You asked about mindset. That was my mindset. Was I'm a super pilot. I'm Superman. I can do this. When I realized that, judgment would have been a lot better had I landed short of where the weather began and just, get a hotel and all that. So that superior judgment trumps superior skills is first and foremost spoken to myself before other people, because I have a habit of having questionable judgment that makes me rely on skills to get me out of. And so, I know that that's a weakness of me, is that I have that, lack of judgment at times. So I try to really err on the side of superior judgment. And should I go? So in the early days of airplane ownership, I did crazy things and, pushed the boundaries quite a bit because I was super pilot. Now today, I am a lot more careful than I was back then. So I don't know how I survived.
Well, don't feel bad, honestly. This is actually something I bring up quite a bit, and that's why I want to reiterate it, and why I normally ask this question is normally the people that own the airplanes are business owners or high-level professionals, and they are really good at what they do. And there's a certain level of behaviors that made them super successful. Normally it's macho and don't take no for an answer, and I'm gonna figure this out and push through. That's what's made most people successful.
And super confidence
business.
And all that stuff, yeah.
Yes, and those are also human factors that the FAA has lined out as behaviors that will kill you.
Yep, dysfunctional behaviors.
And so I think your story's awesome because it really displays it, like somebody coming, and I see this from the other side when people come to me and they just buy an airplane and they're exactly where you're talking about, and they go straight to, well, why can't I just buy these parts from Amazon? Why can't I, I'm just going to do this and that. We're just going to toss a 500 horsepower motor in it. I'm just going to, and I'm trying to caution them, and they're like, well, why can't I fly today? And I'm like, well, there's a wall of thunderstorms there. Okay. And I try to walk it back. Okay. The rules most of them are written in blood. Okay. Especially ADs. And especially the procedures in aircraft. Most of your POH is written in blood. And each new rule that get added is because of that. And so this is a new environment, a new atmosphere that you may not know anything about. And it's, instead of going at it with this macho man, I'm just going to bull rush through this and not take no for an answer, you're actually going to get yourself killed. And you should realize, okay, if the ATC gives me a long vector around something, instead of cursing at them from the plane, if you don't have, you're a new pilot, you might say, hey, they're probably doing this for a reason, to keep me alive.
Yeah.
I'm going to slow down and have a mindset of, I don't understand this, and that's okay. I'm going to continue learning. There are some rules that. Sorry.
Yeah, there was about maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. I had a film shoot. Now I was alone on this one because I hired a local crew, but in the Washington D.C. area. So I flew out in my plane and did the shoot and flew home. Now, my fuel stop I scheduled for North Arkansas, Blytheville, and I landed there, got lunch, got fuel, and when I got back to the airplane, checking the weather and everything else, there was this huge squall line approaching. And so at that point, it looked like South America meeting North America on this storm. So there was the Panama Canal. And I think that had I been earlier in my pilot life, I would have shot the canal. And because I've done that once and I will never do it again, I decided to go Magellan Straits on this. And it took an extra couple of hours. But I flew around that whole thing all the way almost down to the Gulf of Mexico from Arkansas to make it, and because I just was not going to mess with it. Turns out too there were tornadoes on that line, so it was that's an example of growth as a pilot, as growth in my judgment. So yeah.
Somebody told me early on, there's old pilots and then there are bold pilots, but there are no old bold pilots. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. Okay, so I wanted to get into this. What you're doing in the aviation community is awesome, and it looks like your business is thriving from multiple aspects, multiple angles. What got you? Have you always been an entrepreneur? What got you into business?
It's not being an entrepreneur. I always wanted to get into video. I've always been a creative person, so it was always film and video. And I worked for a company for many years, and then I wanted to make movies, so I left and created my own company. So it was almost not that I thought of myself as an entrepreneur. It's just this was the way to get to my goal. And so 25 years ago, I went into business for myself, and now I can't imagine myself working for other people.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you were working for someone else, and then all of a sudden you decided, I think I can make this happen on my own. Talk to me about that jump when you made that decision. Were you scared? I mean, I was in a similar position. I was working as a mechanic in another shop.
Well, for me, it was you could say courage. It was stupidity. It was foolhardiness. It was all sorts of things. And I don't know that I certainly wouldn't do it the same way if I were doing it again. But what I didn't know, and so, fools rush in, that kind of thing. So, again, it was 25 years ago. There was a lot of factors and variables that went into this. I wanted to make movies. I had issues at the company I was working with. There were a whole bunch of things going on.
Yeah, and then the huge learning curve of this. I was there as well, right? So I quit my job, and I'm like, I'm going to do this on my own.
Right.
I'm going to make my own schedule. Is literally what a lot of my friends said, and I always thought, which is somewhat true. And I'm going to be, I'm going to have Mondays off, and I'm going to align it all like this. And then you realize, especially in the first 5 years, no, you're going to do everything.
Well, yeah. So early on, the first couple years, I was not as self-disciplined as I needed to be. So absolutely, to be an entrepreneur, you have to have self-discipline. If you don't, you won't make it. And I'm surprised I survived through that time, but that's one thing I learned is that I would take these days off or whatever, and it was just wrong. And so you have to have a lot of self-discipline.
Yeah. What lessons have you learned that you were able to? I mean, we talked about some of it that transfers over, but what lessons have you taken from business that applied to the cockpit, or vice versa?
Well, I go vice versa pretty easily, because actually I just did a podcast on it to some degree and didn't even cover some of the things. After the podcast, I thought about it more. The use of checklists and being careful now because of the dangers I've had. I drive differently now. I approach trips in the car differently now. I approach my house differently now. Being a pilot, you have to be precise, especially the more up you go in your ratings. Precision is demanded of a pilot. It's very unforgiving when you're not precise. And so I've become a lot more precise in the last 10 years. And that transfers over to everything, to my job, to personal life, to everything else. I'm a lot more precise today. Another word for OCD, but I used to think I was the least OCD person ever, but I've been corrected on that. But I'm much more precise today. That's one thing of the mix between pilot to regular life.
Yeah, it's kind of funny for me coming into a business that has checklists for the airplanes already. So it kind of forced me to kind of go into that, start there. Now there's a lot of other procedures around it now that I have a staff around me. But at least I was familiar with this concept of a checklist, where I think a lot of my friends in different industries, it is kind of foreign to them. There's actually a really good book written, Checklist Manifesto, that talks about the medical industry. For the longest time, they did not use checklists at all, and the people were dying in the hospitals left and right because the surgeon would forget to wash his hands or something.
Right.
And they actually went back and they were like, let's look at what the Air Force was doing, and they go back and they learn about the B-29, which is really when the Air Force or the Army Air Corps decided looking at checklists in general.
Mm-hmm.
So just a interesting plug. So, are you still in the TV business? Is that what you're doing full time, or is your podcast now becoming full more and more?
No, the day job is S Films, or Serendipitous Films, and at S Films we do TV. We've done some films. We do our bread and butter is probably commercials and corporate video. But what's fun is doing TV. I direct some reality TV and stuff like that. So that's actually the day job, and it's still going strong. The channel, the Taking Off YouTube channel, has been steadily growing. And what's interesting is that I've had a very, it's all about aviation, right? So the core audience has been either pilots, student pilots, or hardcore aviation enthusiasts. And I love doing news. I watch news all the time. Even long before I was a pilot, I had like books on black box transcripts and everything else from famous accidents. I was very intrigued by all that. So that's part of who I am. A passion is the news. And so I experimented with doing some news, and I've been lately leaning hardcore into the news. The problem with that is that the audience on YouTube for news is not necessarily pilots and student pilots. So now it's just anybody who's interested in what happened to American Airlines 5342 or whatever. And so I'm going to be splitting the channel, and I'm going to have another channel that I'm going to create, that I'm going to move a lot of the more hardcore aviation stuff over to. And that channel will be called In the Hangar. And I haven't announced yet. We haven't had a hard release on it, but I'm about to, so I don't mind saying it. I don't have anything there at the moment, but I'm going to put programming there and start moving things like, because people that want to see the news don't necessarily care to watch me do a video on my annual with my mechanic, or fly with me to, get this $100 hamburger. So all that will now move to a new channel, and then Taking Off will be primarily news and investigations.
Nice. Yeah, I have seen an uptick in the channels that go into investigations with crashes. And
Well,
there's
a
a
lot of
couple.
people are doing because it's very popular, and it's not that, you know, it, I would want people to know that that's not why I'm doing it. I have been studying airplane crashes since I was a kid, and I've always been intrigued by it. And I listen to news all day long in the car when I'm going here and there. It's news that I do. I'm a news junkie. So, and then in my TV world, I'm built for news. I'm built for doing fast productions and turning them around quickly. And so it all just comes together. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are starting to do it because they see it as instant rock star success in the industry because you're covering these accidents or whatever and they're getting eyeballs. The problem is it does take a lot of work and you need to be accurate. And there's a lot of people who do 1, 2, or 3 and then can't keep it up. So, but there's a few that are really good. Blanco Lirio, Juan Brown, he's great. You know, Hoover at Pilot Debrief. And these are all people that are great. And I love watching their stuff.
Yeah, I want to give you a different spin on that from
Okay.
my perspective. You know, really like military, on the military aviation side, and some of those YouTubers that you talked about, they've got the military side as well. The culture is normally they will brief us on the mistakes. They'll brief us on what happened, the situation, and it's all, we always view it as a lesson, a way to learn about what happened. The Air Force does these really big, thorough investigations on any sort of accident, and then things get changed. You know, for example, one that really hit home to the tanker community was Shell 77. If you follow the tanker community, it was a 135 that crashed outside of Kyrgyzstan, and it realized that there was an issue with the powered rudder, which caused it to separate in flight, which was a huge deal. The airplane broke apart in flight. That changed the way we train. That changed the procedures in our manuals. There was so much learning that came from that, and ultimately, you know, that's how we view it from our side, and obviously remembering our fallen brothers and sisters. So I think what you're doing, maybe from my perspective, I don't view it like, oh, they're just trying to get clicks. I know maybe outside looking in, if you're not from a different industry, you might take it that way, but I really don't. I actually think you're doing something noble. I think the more that we can get out there that this is serious, this is not a game, this is your family in the aircraft. You can park this in a neighborhood and affect many lives, right? So you need to take this seriously. So I actually commend what you're doing, and
I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, I wish you the well, and I think you're doing a huge service to the community. And like you said, yeah, I mean, if somebody's doing it and they're not getting the facts right, that's a huge disservice to the families. There's a huge emotional toll on this, but you're ultimately making the community better. Is my take on that. So I wish you the best, and I'm going to tune in. And so you've at this point, and which you've given me the opportunity to contribute on Taking Off and In the Hangar, which has been awesome. I'm super grateful. And then you've got this next opportunity coming. What else is coming for you? 2025 and beyond. Where's your scope going?
Well, one thing that I'm kind of really excited about is there's a new video on demand subscription-based app called Aeroverse, Aeroverse. Aeroverse is over 400 titles of videos that are just all aviation centric and all sorts of different aviation. So if you subscribe to this app, then you can, watch all this whenever you want. And what I really like about it is they've contracted my company, S Films, to create some of the original content that is on this app. And shooting aviation for S Films, it's a client, a paid deal. I love it. Mixes both worlds, and I love doing it. We've got a couple of shows on there that are doing really, really good. They're a lot of fun to shoot, and we've got a couple more that are coming up. So 2025, I'm really looking forward to shooting more of the Aeroverse shows and putting them on the app. So if you want to help support Aeroverse, it would really be awesome. I really want it to work. It'd be a great place for all of us aviation people to have video on demand content at our fingertip. So go to aeroverse.com and sign up.
That's great. That's exactly what I was going to ask. Next steps, how do we get involved?
Yeah, I'm a salesman, so what can I say?
No, I think it's good, and that's what I wanted to reach out, because you're obviously you're putting yourself. I don't think you're giving yourself as much credit. You're at Oshkosh, you're at Sun and Fun, and the content that you're generating from those events, and then your yearly contribution as well. You're filming throughout the whole once for the whole year's worth of content, which is just incredible. And it's not just clickbait; it's it's quality content that I think is benefiting everyone in the industry nowadays.
Well, thanks.
When I really do, and I appreciate it. Nowadays, people, when they buy an airplane, the best thing they can do is go to YouTube and learn about, and that's what they're doing. They'll go to YouTube and they'll consume every video that they possibly can. Other good resources out there are like the forums. AOPA has a lot of good articles as well. But I mean, Dan's taking off podcast, and anything he puts out there, I would definitely give it a follow. And most of the time, if there's something that I'm searching in the industry, I'm pretty much going to go to Dan's, because he's probably interviewed somebody that's got that. It just kind of pops up. So I really appreciate you. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to contribute to your podcast, and then coming on and helping mine as well. Be sure to like and subscribe. Taking Off, join in on the fun, and is in the hangar videos as well. And then help him out with Aeroverse. He's doing a lot of great work. And then obviously, I'm going to keep making more of these podcasts that are focusing on the stories. Each person that I've encountered in aviation normally just has an incredible story, just like Dan's. And that's what my goal is in this podcast. So please like and subscribe. And I appreciate every one of y'all. Happy flying.